At the turn of the 19th century, Europe stood at a crossroads. Revolution had shattered old monarchies, and war became the language of power. From this uncertainty emerged Napoleon Bonaparte, a soldier whose rise would alter the course of nations. Through battlefield innovations and political reforms, he reshaped how wars were fought and how states were governed. His life would become a defining chapter in modern history, one whose consequences are still felt today. Welcome to Echoes of Time TV, where we journey through history's turning points to understand how Napoleon Bonaparte rose and became one of the greatest emperors in history. Napoleon Bonaparte, also known as Napoleon I, was a French military leader and emperor who conquered much of Europe in the early 19th century. Born on the island of Corsica, Napoleon rapidly rose through the ranks of the military during the French Revolution from 1789 to 1799. After seizing political power in France in a coup d'etat of 1799, he crowned himself emperor in 1804. Shrewd, ambitious, and a skilled military strategist, Napoleon successfully waged war against various coalitions of European nations and expanded his empire. After a disastrous French invasion of Russia in 1812, Napoleon abdicated the throne 2 years later and was exiled to the island of Elba. In 1815, he briefly returned to power in his 100 Days campaign. After a crushing defeat at the Battle of Waterloo, he abdicated once again and was exiled to the remote island of St. Helena, where he died at the age of 51. Napoleon's education and early military career. Napoleon Bonaparte was born on August 15, 1769, in Ajaccio, on the Mediterranean island of Corsica. Napoleon was the second surviving child of Carlo Bonaparte and Mario Letizia Romalino Bonaparte. He had an older brother Joseph and younger siblings Lucien, Elisa, Louise, Pauline, Caroline, and Jeremy. For centuries, Corsica had been controlled by the Republic of Genoa, but allowed to effectively govern itself. However, in 1768, Genoa sold Corsica to the Kingdom of France, which was interested in a more direct administration style. This was met with resistance, and an initial French expeditionary force was checked by a group of Corsican freedom fighters led by the charismatic Pasquale Paoli. At the decisive Battle of Pont Novo in May 1769, the French defeated Paoli's Corsicans, who were forced into hiding. Carlo Bonaparte had initially supported Corsican independence, but after the Corsican defeat, Carlo swore allegiance to his new French overlords. In return, the new French administration awarded the Bonaparte family with new titles and honors. In April 1779, Carlo used his new French connection to send his two eldest sons to school in France. 9-year-old Napoleon was enrolled in the Royal Military School of Brienne-le-Château near Troyes to begin studying for a military career. Napoleon spent the next 5 years at his boarding school, where his strong Corsican accent, strange-sounding name, and fierce Corsican patriotism set him apart from the other students. Lacking friends, Napoleon turned to the company of books. For a time, he considered embarking on a writing career and penned no fewer than 60 essays, novellas, and pamphlets, including a history of Corsica. In the classroom, Napoleon was intellectually gifted, particularly in the field of mathematics. Despite being educated by monks, he was skeptical of the divinity of Jesus Christ. This skepticism led him to view religion as a political tool, which he would use wisely effectively during his career. In February 1784, Carlo Bonaparte died. 2 years later, Napoleon graduated from the prestigious École Militaire as a military lieutenant. but spent most of the subsequent months on leave in Corsica. Napoleon and his siblings enthusiastically supported the French Revolution when it began in 1789, with Napoleon winning election as Lieutenant Colonel in the Revolutionary National Guard in April 1792. Their support for the new French government put the Bonaparte siblings at odds with Paoli, who still championed Corsican independence. Rising tension between the Bonapartes and the Paoli supporters soon forced Napoleon's family to flee to mainland France in 1793. Exiled from his homeland, Napoleon was no longer a Corsican nationalist but was now committed to the French cause. The French Revolution began in 1789, and within 3 years, revolutionaries had overthrown the monarchy and proclaimed a French Republic. In the spring of 1792, revolutionary France went to war with Austria and Prussia, kicking off the Revolutionary War. After the stunning French victory of the Battle of Valmy in 20th September 1792, the First French Republic was proclaimed, and King Louis XVI of France was guillotined on 21st January 1793. As the French Republic became more radical and belligerent, additional nations joined the war against it, including Great Britain, Spain, and the Dutch Republic. On 28 August 1793, a fleet of British and Spanish ships occupied the harbor of Toulon. Since Toulon housed the entire French Mediterranean fleet, it was vital for the Republic. Before we continue, it is important for us to understand that before Napoleon and his family fled to mainland France, during his year in Corsica, he became affiliated with the Jacobins, a pro-democratic political group. But in 1793, following a clash with the nationalist Corsican governor, which is Pasquale Paoli, the Bonaparte family fled their native island to mainland France, where Napoleon returned into military service. In France, Napoleon became associated with Augustin Robespierre, the brother of the revolutionary leader Maximilien Robespierre, a Jacobin who was a key force behind the Reign of Terror in 1793 to 1794, a period of violence against enemies of the revolution. During this time, Napoleon was promoted to the rank of Brigadier General in the army. However, after Robespierre fell from power and was guillotined along with his brother Augustin in July 1794, Napoleon was briefly put under house arrest for his ties to the brothers. On October 1795, Napoleon helped suppress a royalist insurrection against the revolutionary government in Paris when the Republic's government was scrambling to defend Paris from an impending royalist insurrection. Since Napoleon was one of the few qualified officers in the capital, he was put in charge of the defense, a task he carried out with ruthless efficiency. After requisitioning some cannons, Napoleon troops fired grape shots into the crowd. This event was referred to historically as the 13th Vendémiaire. By suppressing the revolt of 13 Vendémiaire, Napoleon won the attention of Paul Barras, one of the leaders of the new government called the French Directory. In 1795, Barras introduced the young general to Josephine de Beauharnais, a 32-year-old widow with whom Napoleon quickly fell in love. Additionally, Napoleon was promoted to Major General. Barras secured Napoleon's appointment to the command of the French Army of Italy. On 9 March 1796, Napoleon married Josephine in a civil ceremony before leaving for Italy 2 days later. It was at this point that he began spelling his name in a Frenchified way as Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon's rise to power. In 1796, Napoleon commanded a French army that defeated the larger armies of Austria, one of his country's primary rivals, in a series of battles in Italy. In 1797, France and Austria signed a Treaty of Campo Formio, resulting in territorial gains for the French. The following year, the Directory, that is the five-person group that had governed France since 1795, offered to let Napoleon lead an invasion of England. Napoleon determined that France's navy forces were not yet ready to cope up against the superior British Royal Navy. Instead, he proposed an invasion of Egypt in an effort to wipe out British trade routes with India. Napoleon's troops scored a victory against Egypt's military rulers, the Mamluks, at the Battle of the Pyramids in July 1798. Soon, however, his forces were stranded after his naval fleet was nearly decimated by the British at the Battle of the Nile in August 1798. In early 1799, Napoleon's army launched an invasion of Ottoman Empire that ruled in Syria, which ended with a failed siege of Acre, located in modern-day Israel. That summer, with the political situation in France marked by uncertainty, the ever-ambitious and cunning Napoleon opted to abandon his army in Egypt and return to France. In October 1799, Napoleon landed in France and was approached by several disgruntled French officials such as Emmanuel Joseph Seyss, who wanted to use him as a sword of a coup. Napoleon accepted, and on 9 to 10th November thereabouts that same year, 1799, he overthrew the government in the bloodless coup of 18 Brumaire. Napoleon then outmaneuvered Seyss to become the leading figure of the new government called the French Consulate. Additionally, with the Treaty of Amiens in 1802, the war-weary British agreed to peace with the French, although the peace would only last for a year. Napoleon worked to restore stability to post-revolutionary France. He centralized the government, instituted reforms in such areas as banking and education, supported science and the arts, and sought to improve relations between his regime and the Pope, who represented France's main religion, known as Catholicism, which had suffered during the Revolution. One of his most significant accomplishments was the Napoleonic Code, which streamlined the French legal system and continues to form the foundation of French civil law to this day. In 1802, a constitutional amendment made Napoleon first consul for life. 2 years later, in 1804, he crowned himself Emperor of France in a lavish ceremony at the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. The consulate lasted for 4 years, during which time Napoleon accomplished some of his long-lasting political achievements. He negotiated the Concordat of 1801, which reconciled France with the Catholic Church, and established the Napoleon Code, which echoed some of the libel reforms of the Revolution. He sent an invasion force to reclaim Haiti and re-establish slavery there. This invasion force failed, however, and Haiti gained its independence in 1804. Additionally, a first consul, Napoleon made the Louisiana Purchase, which doubled the size of the United States. Militarily, he crossed the Alps and defeated the Austrians at the Battle of Marengo, and secured an end to the Revolutionary War, which I stated earlier, and then he signed the Treaty of Amiens. Around this time, he was confirmed first consul for his life by plebiscite. However, after Napoleon's coronation, first as Emperor of French, then as King of Italy in March 1805, Britain was joined by Austria, Russia, and Naples in the War of the Third Coalition from 1805 to 1806 against France. Napoleon wasted no time marching into Germany at the head of his new Grand Army, which was subdivided into 8 semi-autonomous corps to allow for more speed and flexibility. This corps system proved greatly effective and allowed Napoleon to force the capitulation of an Austrian army at the end of the campaign. He then captured Vienna, the capital of Austria, on the 13th November and decisively defeated an Austro-Russian army at the Battle of Austerlitz, that's in December 2, 1805, largely regarded as one of his greatest victories. After Austria's surrender, Napoleon reorganized several German states into the Confederation of the Rhine under his own protection. This directly led to the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire in July 1806. Napoleon also deposed the Bourbon King of Naples and installed his brother Joseph on its throne. Louis Bonaparte would become the King of Holland in 1806, while Jeremy got the Kingdom of Westphalia in 1807, an attempt to establish a dynasty for his family. Napoleon has often been criticized for giving too much power to his less competent brothers. In October 1806, Prussia joined with Russia and Britain in the War of the Fourth Coalition from 1806 to 1807. Napoleon smashed the Prussian army at the Battle of Jena Auerstedt on October 14th and entered Berlin only days later. Pushing on into Prussia occupying Poland, he created a new client state, the Grand Duchy of Warsaw, before fighting the Russians to a standstill at the bloody Battle of Eylau from 7 to 8 February 1807. On 14 June, Napoleon beat the Russians at the Battle of Freeland, after which he met with Tsar Alexander I of Russia on a raft in the middle of the Nemi River to negotiate peace. In the ensuing treaties of Tilsit, a Franco-Prussian alliance was established, and Alexander agreed to join Napoleon's large-scale embargo against Britain, known as the Continental System. The treaties also saw Prussia lose half of its territory. This was arguably the peak of Napoleon's power, his influence stretching across Western and Central Europe. Meanwhile, the initial successes of Iberian rebels emboldened the Australian Empire to launch the War of the Fifth Coalition in April 1809. It was during this war, on the banks of the Danube, that Napoleon suffered his first defeat as emperor at the Battle of Aspen-Exilien on the 21st to 22 May 1809. Though he eventually regrouped and defeated the Austrians at the Battle of Wagram on the 5th to 6th of July, Aspen-Exilien proved to Europe that Napoleon could be defeated. In the aftermath of the war with Austria, Napoleon married the Austrian Archduchess Maria Louise, daughter of the Habsburg Emperor, in April 1810, after he had divorced Josephine the previous January because she failed to produce an heir. On the 20th March 1811, she gave birth to their son, Napoleon Francois Joseph Charles Bonaparte, who became known as Napoleon II and was given the title King of Rome. In addition to his son, with Maria Louise, Napoleon had several illegitimate children. By 1811, the French and Russian empires were on a coalition course. Russia viewed the existence of the French-controlled Duchy of Warsaw as a threat, while Napoleon felt betrayed when Tsar Alexander exited the Continental System. On 21st June 1812, Napoleon's invasion of Russia began, as over 615,000 French and Allied troops crossed the Niemen River, the largest invasion force Europe had yet seen. The Russians, however, refused to give battle, luring the French deeper into their territory and engaging in scorched earth tactics along the way. On 7 September, the French and Prussia fought the bloody Battle of Borodino, and Napoleon forces marched on to Moscow. A week later, only discovered that almost the entire population had evacuated. Retreating Russians set fires across the city in an effort to deprive enemy troops of supplies. After waiting a month for a surrender that never came, Napoleon, faced with the onset of the Russian winter, was forced to order his starving and exhausted army out of Moscow. After realizing the Russians were not about to make peace, Napoleon ordered a retreat in October. However, the onset of the brutal winter and the pursuing Russian armies decimated Napoleon's Grande Armée. By the time the French crossed back over to the Niemen River in December 1812, they had lost half of 1,000,000 men. That is, of Napoleon's 516,000 troops who began the campaign, only an estimated 100,000 made it out of Russia. The rest died. At the same time as the catastrophic Russian invasion, French forces were engaged in the Peninsular War from 1808 to 1814, which resulted in the Spanish and Portuguese, with assistance from British, driving the French from the Iberian Peninsula. The great powers of Europe leaped at the chance to finally defeat Napoleon. In the subsequent War of the Six Coalition, 1813 to 1814, Russia was joined by Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Sweden, after Napoleon suffered another crushing defeat at the Battle of Leipzig from 16th to 19th October 1813. Many of his German allies defected, and the Confederation of the Rhine was dissolved. The coalition then invaded France and captured Paris, leaving Napoleon with no choice but to abdicate on the 11th April 1814. With the Treaty of Fontainebleau, he was exiled to Elba, a Mediterranean island off the coast of Italy. He was given sovereignty over the small island, while his wife and son went to Austria, and King Louis XVIII of France ascended the throne. On 1st March 1815, Napoleon took advantage of the political unrest caused by the Bourbon Restoration and landed on the coast of southern France with 1,000 soldiers. On March 20, he returned to Paris, where he was welcomed by cheering crowds. The new king, Louis XVIII, on hearing of his return, fled, and Napoleon began what came to be known as his 100 Days Campaign. Upon Napoleon's return to France, a coalition of allies, that is the Austrians, British, Prussians, and Russians, who considered the French emperor as an enemy, began to prepare for war. Napoleon raised a new army and planned to strike preemptively, defeating the allied forces one by one before they could launch a united attack against him. By late May, the Seventh Coalition had sent two armies to Belgium to threaten northeastern France, including an Anglo-Dutch-German army led by Otto Wesley, Duke of Wellington, and a Prussian army led by Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher. On 15 June 1815, Napoleon forces invaded Belgium, where British and Prussian troops were stationed. On June 16, the following day, Napoleon troops defeated the Prussians at the Battle of Ligny. However, 2 days later, on June 18, at the Battle of Waterloo near Brussels, the French were crushed by the British with assistance from the Prussians. Napoleon was totally crushed this time. On June 22, 1815, Napoleon once again was forced to abdicate. In October 1815, Napoleon was exiled to the remote British-held island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic Ocean. Here he was kept under a close guard by his British captors. His health steadily deteriorated until he died on 5th May 1821 at the age of 51, most likely from stomach cancer. It is noted that during his reign in power, Napoleon often posed for paintings with his hand in his vest, leading to some speculations after his death that he had been plagued by stomach pain for years. Napoleon was buried on the island despite his request to be laid to rest on the banks of the Seine among the French people I have loved so much. In 1840, his remains were returned to France and entombed in a crypt at Les Invalides in Paris, where other French military leaders are interred. Napoleon is best remembered for his military career, over the course of which he fought 60 battles and lost only 7. His military innovation changed European warfare. He utilized conscription, popularized the implementation of corps as an army's largest unit, and pioneered certain military tactics that have been studied over the years since he died. He is often ranked alongside Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar as one of history's most brilliant generals. He also implemented a set of civil laws, best known as the Napoleon Code, that was adopted throughout much of continental Europe and influenced the judicial systems of many modern nations. Alternatively viewed as a reformer and an autocrat, a warmonger and a defender of liberties, Napoleon enjoys a controversial reputation but remains one of Western history's best known figures. Napoleon's empire ultimately collapsed under the weight of its ambition, yet his influence endured long after his defeat. The legal codes he introduced became foundation of modern law, and the military principles he refined continued to inform strategy centuries later. History judged him neither simply as a hero nor a villain, but as a force of transformation. In the end, Napoleon Bonaparte was not just a man of his time, he was a figure who reshaped time itself, leaving echoes that continue to resonate through history. Thank you for listening.